Hey, everybody. All right, so now we are going to kick off with Esther, part 2 in our Powerhouse Women of the Bible series. So we left off where we're talking about how Esther was chosen to become queen, right? So she replaces Queen Vashti, who was like, I'm not going to be coming and doing what you say. She refused. Her lack of obedience then got her kicked to the curb, and so then Queen Esther, long reign Queen Esther, right? So Esther gets to come into the kingdom and start being queen. So it's pretty cool. We're going to pick up from there. We've got her uncle Mordecai, because remember, he took her in because Esther was an orphan, and so Mordecai raised her, and Esther went when she became queen to go live into the palace, but Mordecai lived close by. They lived right there within that same community, same town, same city, and so Mordecai overheard 2 guards who were plotting to kill King Xerxes. So Mordecai comes to Esther because, again, she's like a daughter to him. He comes to her. He tells her about the news of these guards who are plotting to kill the king. So then Esther requests to be able to speak on the behalf, of Mordecai to come. And so the king is informed about these 2 guards who are plotting to kill him. And so those guards, in return, they were killed, but Esther was able to receive some more favor in the king's eyes because of who Mordecai was in her life. He was her family, but also then, Mordecai as well, because he's a very well received, very well respected fella in the community. The way that it reads, it just gives that vibe, that Mordecai was just such a good dude. And so that was written down in a time, it's kind of like back in the day, their version of journaling, how if we may do like little diaries or journals. They called them chronicles though. And so the chronicles were written down about the Mordecai who came and shared about this evil plot to take the king's life. And so the king is saved because Mordecai came forward, told what's up. And so just remember that's important. That's going to come back in our story in just a moment. And so there's this dude, I told you in week 1, video 1, that there was a guy named Haman. And some people were saying offenses like Haman, but I don't know. I'm country as cornbread, so I'm going to say Haman. But Haman was the king's, he was such a high official in that time. And so I'm going to call him like his right-hand man of the king, right? He's very, very powerful. Well, Haman decided that he got a little too big for his britches, you know what I mean? And so anywhere he went in town, he's like, you're going to bow down to me, kind of thing. And Mordecai worshiped God, so he said, no, I'm not. He refused to bow down to Haman. So Haman gets tore up from the floor up about it, y'all. And he decides that because his wife also, that's a little bit of the story that we can elaborate on a little bit more, but she got in his head, Haman's wife did. She kind of creeped in, planted some little seeds of not niceness, and Haman also got drunk. So it's just like a whole big mess, y'all. It sounds like an episode of I don't know, a bad soap opera. I don't know, maybe really bad reality TV. But so he decides that he tells some of the people that worked under him that they were going to go build, what was it called? Shucks, I'm trying to think what it's called. It's like this big spear thing that's not really gallows because you hear people being hanged, but it was like the big, huge spear. I'll look it up and make sure I tell y'all whenever we get to talk. But basically, it was awful. It would be really, really bad to die that way. And like a stake sticking up that they built, and they would put somebody on it, and that has really happened. So Haman instructs that one of those be built because the next day he was going to go to the king and talk the king into sentencing Mordecai to death because he refused to bow down to him. So again, it's just silly. Like, it's so immature. But he was so mad because he was so in the flesh and he thought that he was somebody, right? And so he's going to do that. But that night, so cool, y'all. That night, the king couldn't sleep. And so he asked for one of the servants to bring, do you remember I was telling you about the Chronicles before? Kind of like a little diary, little journal. He asked for somebody that worked for him to come and read him the Chronicles out loud. So, guess what he read? He read about the story of how Mordecai came and reported the potential murder that was going to be on the king, right? Of those 2 guards that were plotting to kill him. So the king then says, oh, we've got to honor Mordecai. So it's like, whoa, topsy-turvy twist right in the story. And so as the story goes, the next morning, get up, Haman has his plan. Remember, he's plotting. He wants to take Mordecai out because he wouldn't bow down to him. So whenever he gets to the palace that morning, y'all, the king tells Haman, he's like, hey, I want you to go and put the best royal robes on Mordecai and then literally patrol him around the entire city on the best horse. The high horse, when he's taking him around for everybody to see. This was a big thing. Like, this is very culturally like what they did then as like a high honor. And so then Mordecai is given a job in the kingdom and he's elevated up into a royal position because here he is. He saved the king's life and the king realizes it because the Chronicles read out loud. That's such a God thing, isn't it? Never mentions God. Remember, Book of Esther doesn't talk about God specifically. But so, cool thing is, Mordecai becomes a part of the royal kingdom. And then as Esther invites the King Xerxes, and Haman, because she knows what Haman has done behind the scenes. And so she invites them to come to what they called a banquet, basically like fancy dinner. So the very first night, they have the banquet, and they have a good time, a feast, they drink and that kind of thing. And so she didn't at this time say what she really needed to say, which was, hey, I need for you to retract the decree of killing my people, because Haman had talked the king into making a decree in that time, which meant that in 11 months, all the Jewish people were going to be annihilated. And so Esther was working on a time crunch here because she had to save her people from exile. And so the first night, all was well. Second night, she then requests at the closure of first night, hey, can we have dinner again? And they're probably like, and old Haman's all full of himself. So he probably was not a happy camper. But so they ended up, second night, Esther basically calls Haman out in front of the king, lets him know what's going on. And she says, I'm a Jew. She lets him know who she is, but the king he just loved her. Or he loved looking at her. I'm not real sure, but it says that, it's like she had favor in the king's eyes. But the coolest part about this story is that Esther fasted and prayed for 3 days before she went and asked for the meeting with the king, which was a big deal because even though she was his wife, y'all, she could have been beheaded, killed, murdered, because she decided just to go talk to the king anytime she wanted to. Like, crazy bananas how things used to be. I'm so glad that it is not that way now. But so the king then, as the story goes, he believes what Esther is saying. She finds favor and she remains as queen. But then you know what happens though? Bad dude Haman. You remember that stake that he put in the ground? Whatever that thing, the proper term is, like where he was gonna to Mordecai. Yeah, that he built for Mordecai became how he was sentenced to death. It's unbelievable. So then fast forward like 11 months on the day that the Jews were supposed to originally be annihilated by the decree that Haman had talked the king into writing, he ends up making it into a Jewish holiday. They were so blessed. He couldn't actually retract it completely because that was a no-no. You just don't do that as a king. They weren't permitted to do that back then. But he was able to kind of tweak it a little bit with Esther. Esther and Mordecai got to be a part of that. Mordecai got elevated to the highest in command. So basically, he took the bad dude Haman's spot, became the king's right-hand man, and they ruled the kingdom in such a more God-honoring and favorable way. And so it's just so cool. Esther actually stayed queen for 13 years with the king as King Xerxes' wife. Let's see, what else was a few notes? That's all off the top of my noodle. So if I've left anything out, we'll talk about it as well. The holiday Purim, if you want to write that down, it's still a Jewish holiday that is practiced now. It kind of takes place at different times of the year. It can happen, it's based on timing. So like February to April, and how it all works. But maybe that's something we could study together if y'all want to know more. But Purim, or I've heard it pronounced Porhim, so I'm not exactly certain. Again, country's cornbread here, so I'm doing the best I can do. But the point of this whole story is that despite, just the exile and God's absence in some of the decision making that these people had, and even the moral compromise and like all the partying and who knows what all happened there, if not real sure if they were very promiscuous or whatever. But God did not abandon his promises, y'all. He did not abandon Esther or Mordecai in their desperate times of need. And even bigger than them, he did not abandon all of the Jewish people. God showed up, he showed out, and he saved an entire generation of people for forever, for years to come. And so, God is just so faithful. He uses every single situation in our lives. As Romans 8:28 tells us, that he will work all things for our good, or all things are good of those who love him. So we get to walk in the redemption and knowing that he's always going to keep his promises. And I think the story of Esther is a great example about God's faithfulness and his mighty intentionality for our lives. And so can't wait for us to talk more about that together and kind of unpack and really dive in a little bit more about all the ways that God was so intentional in this story. And so write down any questions that you have, and we will we'll chat those up tonight, and I'll have a few write downs for you. But I talked about Esther 4:14 last week, so remember that one is perhaps you were created for such a time as this. So my challenge to leave out on this video is, what is something right now that you know that you should be doing and that you can say yes to the kingdom, that perhaps you, beautiful one watching this video, that you were created for such a time as this. See you soon.